There's a very specific kind of tired that doesn't come from working a 60-hour week. It doesn't come from running a marathon, dealing with a crazy inbox, or chasing kids all day. It comes from being around someone who requires you to relentlessly monitor yourself. It's an exhaustion of the spirit, and most people never find the right words for it. That's exactly what we're unpacking today. Because if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you lost something, energy, ground, maybe a piece of your sanity, but you couldn't name the theft, this episode is for you. And that inability to name the theft, that's precisely what keeps the cycle going. You can't point to a tangible offense. You can't take a snapshot of it. You can't put it on a spreadsheet. So you turn it inward. You start thinking, I must just be overly sensitive. I'm misinterpreting their tone. I'm just bad at communicating. But what we're exploring today suggests a completely different reading of that internal monologue. You are not the problem. You are the target. Which brings us to the core of today's episode. We're pulling apart the hidden mechanical gears of manipulation. And to do that, we're centering everything on Thomas Erikson's massively popular and honestly deeply controversial book, Surrounded by Psychopaths. Now, most summaries of a book like this stop at giving you a checklist, the top 10 signs your boss is toxic, red flags to watch for, but that's not what we're doing here. We're flipping the lens entirely. The goal today is to understand why you, with your specific traits, your specific personality, are targeted, how your own natural way of moving through the world gets mapped, studied, and turned into a user manual for someone else's benefit. That's a different question, and it's a much more useful one. So here's how we approach the research for this. We have Erikson's text at the center. Paired with that, a sharp critical essay called The Mechanics of Manipulation and the Map of Vulnerability, which breaks down the actual psychological tools these people use. But to give you the full picture, we also pulled from some of the harshest skepticism out there, extensive Reddit threads where readers completely tear into the author's scientific credentials. That context matters, and we're going to address it directly. And finally, to anchor the behavioral theories in empirical science, we're drawing on a peer-reviewed academic paper by Jonasson and colleagues from 2009, which examines the dark triad of personality traits and frames them not as clinical disorders, but as evolutionary strategies, pop psychology, aggressive internet skepticism, and hardcore evolutionary behavioral science, all in one episode. Let's start with the friction, because that's usually where the most interesting insight lives. Let's talk about Thomas Erikson and the pushback, because if you've read those Reddit threads, people are furious. Here's the context. Thomas Erikson is not a clinical psychologist. He is not a psychiatrist. He has no PhD in behavioral science. He is a Swedish behavioral expert and communicator who spent roughly 2 decades consulting for corporations, evaluating executives, training management teams, functioning as a corporate troubleshooter. His laboratory wasn't a clinical setting, it was the boardroom. Think about the kind of calls he was taking. A board of directors where the company is bleeding its best talent. The atmosphere is toxic. The quarterly reports are tanking. But nobody can pinpoint exactly whose fault it is. That was his world. And what he kept observing across boardrooms and leadership failures and toxic department cultures was a fundamental lack of vocabulary. People were being exploited, but they couldn't articulate how. They just felt that localized exhaustion we talked about at the top. So to solve that, Erikson built a framework around the DISC personality model, which categorizes human behavior into 4 color-coded types: red, yellow, green, and blue. And he used this not just to explain how people miscommunicate, but to show how predatory individuals use those communication styles as actual weapons. Now the critics, and we need to address this head on. The backlash on Erikson's work is severe. Critics label it pseudoscience. They accuse him of what they call author fraudulence. Their primary argument is that the DISC model lacks rigorous peer-reviewed clinical backing, especially compared to the gold standard in psychology, the big 5 personality traits. And beyond that, they argue that a layman throwing around a heavily weighted clinical term like psychopath is reckless, that it medicalizes everyday bad behavior without a medical license. The skepticism is warranted, and we need to pass what the critics are getting right and what they might be missing. The critics are entirely correct on the clinical front. The DISC model is not used by clinical psychologists for diagnosis. It's what we call an ipsative test. It measures relative preferences rather than absolute traits. And the term psychopath, in clinical terms, falls under antisocial personality disorder in the DSM-5, which requires rigorous psychiatric evaluation. You cannot diagnose a psychopath based on a corporate seminar. So, is Erikson just selling corporate snake oil? If the model isn't scientifically rigorous and the terminology is clinically inaccurate, why are millions of people reading this book and saying it literally saved their lives? Because of the difference between a diagnostic tool and a heuristic framework. Think of it this way: if you're lost in the woods, a highly detailed topological map from a geological survey is scientifically accurate. But if you don't know how to read it, you will still freeze to death. A simple compass that just points north isn't a comprehensive map of the terrain, but it will get you out of the woods. Erikson is providing a compass. If you are being emotionally decimated by a toxic manager, handing you a dense 400-page psychiatric diagnostic manual will not help you survive the Monday morning strategy meeting. You'd be fired by Tuesday. But giving you a simple conceptual framework, helping you realize, oh, this person is using my natural aversion to conflict against me, that gives you immediate, actionable leverage. We are not here today to learn how to diagnose anyone. We are here to understand the mechanics of social exploitation, survival vocabulary. That's what this is. Now, to really ground this in empirical science, we need to turn to the Jonasson paper from 2009. Because when people hear the word psychopath, the cultural conditioning is overwhelming. We immediately picture the guy in the ski mask, the serial killer in the basement, the Hannibal Lecter archetype. But the Jonasson research and the broader study of what's called the Dark Triad points to something far more common, far more insidious, and deeply woven into everyday social life. So let's define this properly. What exactly is the Dark Triad? The Dark Triad is a psychological theory that groups together three distinct but empirically overlapping personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and subclinical psychopathy. Subclinical being the key word there. We're not talking about the basement, we're talking about the office, the relationship, the family dinner table. Let's break each one down. Narcissism, and I know this word has lost almost all meaning on the internet. Everyone's ex is suddenly a narcissist. But scientifically, in the context of the Dark Triad, we're looking at something far more specific than vanity or selfies. Narcissism here is characterized by a profound ingrained sense of entitlement, an ego that requires constant external validation just to sustain itself. These individuals carry a grandiose self-view, a genuine belief that they are fundamentally superior to the people around them. And because they believe that, they believe the rules of reciprocity simply don't apply to them. They are the main character of reality. Everyone else is background cast, there to facilitate their storyline. Machiavellianism, named after Niccolo Machiavelli, whose 16th century text The Prince outlined the mechanics of ruthless political power. In psychology, individuals high in Machiavellianism are master strategists, cold, cynical, highly duplicitous. They view relationships not as emotional bonds but as transactional chess games. They will figure out what you want, pretend to give it to you, and extract what they need in the process. The ends always justify the means. And then there is psychopathy, and we're talking about subclinical psychopathy here, not the guy serving a life sentence. These individuals are functioning in society, right next to you. This trait is marked by high impulsivity, a constant need for thrill-seeking to stave off boredom, and its absolute defining characteristic, a profound structural lack of empathy. They don't feel it. They do not experience the emotional resonance of other people's pain, and they lack the internal mechanism for remorse or guilt. So mix that together, an insatiable need for superiority, a cold, strategic view of human beings as tools, and a complete absence of guilt when those tools get broken. That is an incredibly dangerous cocktail. But here's what I found most captivating about the Jonasson research. It asks a question I had honestly never considered. Why do these traits exist at all? If human beings survived by forming tribes, cooperating, caring for each other, why didn't evolution weed out these antisocial traits 100,000 years ago? This is where evolutionary game theory enters the picture. The Jonasson paper demonstrates that these traits are not random evil mutations. They represent a highly specific, evolutionarily viable social strategy, meaning they serve a purpose. Evolutionary psychologists frame human behavior in terms of reproductive and survival success. The paper links the Dark Triad explicitly to what's called a short-term mating strategy. And what does that look like in practice? It's essentially an exploitative hit-and-run approach to social and romantic interactions. Think about the alternative, a long-term strategy, maintaining a marriage, a deep friendship, a career at a single company, requires a massive investment of time and energy. It requires reciprocity, compromise, prioritizing someone else's needs, experiencing guilt when you harm them so you can repair the bond. All of which sounds completely intolerable to someone high in Dark Triad traits. They lack empathy. They score incredibly low on agreeableness. They are constitutionally unsuited for long-term cooperation. So they pivot. To survive, they must pivot. If a community figures out you are entirely selfish and will never reciprocate, they will ostracize you. To survive, the Dark Triad individual becomes incredibly adept at extracting what they need: status, money, emotional labor, in the short term, before the community figures out who they really are. They charm, they extract, they burn the bridge, and they move on to a new community. The paper also highlights that this strategy is particularly prevalent in men. Evolutionarily speaking, biological asymmetry means short-term mating historically provided direct reproductive benefits, passing on genes widely without bearing the immense biological costs of pregnancy and child-rearing. The Dark Triad traits facilitate this by removing the psychological barriers, empathy and guilt that would normally prevent someone from abandoning a partner. Now, I want to challenge this framework slightly, because when you describe someone who is self-interested, manipulative, and looking for a short-term win, it sounds like we're just describing a run-of-the-mill jerk. There are selfish bosses and arrogant dates everywhere. How does the Dark Triad profile differ from ordinary bad behavior? The distinction lies in the level of calculation and the complete absence of a moral baseline. An ordinary jerk is selfish. They might cut you off in traffic because they're impatient, take credit for your idea in a meeting because they're insecure. But an ordinary jerk still has a baseline of empathy. They feel uncomfortable when they see you cry. They still have a conscience. The Dark Triad individual doesn't just act selfishly in the moment. They systematically dismantle your self-esteem over time so that you willingly hand over everything they need. Here's the analogy that captures the mechanical difference. An ordinary jerk is like a thunderstorm on the radar. You see the dark clouds gathering. You hear the thunder. You know to grab an umbrella. They are overt. The Dark Triad individual operates more like a microscopic leak in the plumbing behind the walls of your house. You don't see the water. The wallpaper looks perfect. The foundation feels solid. And you don't realize there's any damage at all until the joists rot and the entire floor collapses underneath you. That's Erikson's core thesis. The psychopath isn't the cartoon villain. They are the person 2 desks down who remembers exactly how you take your coffee. The person on the dating app who magically shares every single one of your obscure childhood interests. They don't attack you with over-aggression. They attack you by hijacking your own personality. Which brings us to the centerpiece of today's episode. Identifying a manipulator by memorizing a list of external red flags is ultimately a failing strategy if you don't know your own internal vulnerabilities. The manipulator maps your personality profile long before you realize a game is even being played. They operate like behavioral hackers. A hacker who wants to infiltrate a network doesn't throw malicious code at a firewall randomly. They map the system. They look for the open ports, the unpatched software. Erikson uses the DIS model to show exactly how predatory individuals find the open ports in human behavior. So let's get into the mechanics of that mapping. Let's look at how a manipulator exploits each of the 4 personality types, starting with red. Reds are defined by dominance and drive, fast-paced, task-oriented, deeply impatient, highly competitive, the alpha leaders, the visionaries who want results yesterday. They process information quickly and have no patience for emotional nuance. They respect strength, boldness, and direct communication. Now, if you're a basic manipulator trying to get a red to do your bidding, your first instinct might be to flatter them, ingratiate yourself, tell them how brilliant their strategy is. That is exactly why a basic manipulator will fail with a red. Reds are virtually immune to standard flattery because they already know they're capable. They view sycophancy as weakness. Walk into a red's office and spend 60 seconds complimenting them. They're already drumming their fingers on the desk, looking at their watch, calculating how quickly they can end the meeting. So what's the exploit? How do you hack dominance? You don't flatter a red, you challenge them. You present them with an insurmountable crisis and subtly imply that only their unique brilliance can solve it. You weaponize their drive for accomplishment against them. The case study Erikson uses to illustrate this is genuinely chilling. It's the story of Mike and Panilla. Panilla is brought in as the new CEO of a struggling company. Textbook red. The staff literally calls her the hatchet woman, which, honestly, a red probably loves. She's ruthless. She operates from 30,000 feet. She's there to clean house. Then there's Mike. Mike is a middle manager who loves his salary and despises actual work. He survives by taking credit for other people's successes and disappearing when things go wrong. A parasite. When Panilla arrives, every other manager keeps a low profile. But Mike moves closer to the fire. Because Mike understands a crucial vulnerability of the red personality, what Erikson calls the helicopter view. Reds see the massive overarching strategy, but they often miss the granular details happening right under their noses. Mike maneuvers to report directly to her. He positions himself entirely within her blind spot, and then he initiates contact with a line that is pure manipulation masquerading as courage. He walks into her office and says, "You might not like me saying this, but I'm really impressed by the way you've got this ship back on an even keel." Dissect that for a second. You might not like me saying this. Why does he start there? Because it's a calculated risk. It serves as a qualification, signaling that Mike knows he's stepping slightly out of bounds, but he's choosing to do it anyway. He's hiding flattery behind a mask of fearlessness. Reds respect courage. By challenging her authority slightly, he forces her to lower her guard. Her internal read of him becomes, this isn't a yes man trying to save his job. This is a straight shooter who isn't afraid of me. Port open. Now comes the payload. He manufactures a catastrophic crisis, a major project failing that is entirely his fault. He goes to Panilla, but he frames the disaster strategically. You're going to be angry about this, and you have every right to be. Fake accountability. He presents the problem, then immediately pivots to the solution. And he describes the exact skills needed to fix it in a way that perfectly mirrors Panilla's own self-image. Essentially, this is an unmitigated disaster, and realistically, there isn't a single person in this building with the strategic capacity to fix it, except you. Panilla takes the bait completely. She doesn't see manipulation. She sees empirical confirmation of her own superiority. She picks up the file and starts working on the solution. Mike has successfully delegated his own incompetence upward to the CEO. And while the hatchet woman is working until midnight sorting out logistics and supply chains, Mike is having a long leisurely lunch at the golf club, expense to the company. He used her dominance, her need for action, as the engine to solve his own problems, a terrifying inversion of power. Now let's move to a completely different frequency, the exact opposite of a red. Let's talk about yellow. If reds are about dominance, yellows are about influence and connection. Highly social, expressive, relationship-oriented, wildly creative, the life of the party. They operate on emotion and enthusiasm. Fundamentally, a yellow wants to be noticed, included, and loved. They are deeply optimistic and tend to see the best in everyone. And you can instantly see how that optimism makes them a walking target. But the Mike approach won't work here. Challenging a yellow with a crisis just stresses them out. They don't have the ego drive to conquer it. They deflect, ask someone else for help, and move on. So the exploit is completely different. For a yellow, the weapon is intense charisma, weaponized affirmation, and profound emotional mirroring. But that's only phase 1. Phase 2, the necessary payload, is total isolation. The case study here is a romantic dynamic between Lars and Anna. Lars is a classic yellow, jolly, endlessly positive, talks to everyone at the grocery store. He might be a bit self-centered in his storytelling, but he is genuinely kind-hearted, a golden retriever of a human being. He starts dating Anna, who operates squarely on the Dark Triad spectrum. Anna reads his profile instantly. He wears his heart on his sleeve. So how does she initiate the hack? She becomes a perfect mirror. A yellow falls in love with the reflection of their own enthusiasm. Anna reflects his energy back at him at twice the intensity. She laughs at all his jokes. She hangs on every word. She creates an environment where Lars feels more seen, more understood, more wildly special than he ever has in his life. And here's the crucial observation Erikson makes. Lars isn't actually falling in love with Anna. He is falling in love with the bespoke emotional architecture she has constructed specifically for him. But the mirroring is just the bait. Because yellows thrive on massive social networks. Dozens of friends, acquaintances, colleagues they chat with constantly. And the manipulator knows that network is a threat because a broad social circle provides reality checks. If Lars tells a friend, Anna did this weird thing today, the friend might say, that's not normal. The manipulator cannot allow that, so the isolation begins, and the way Anna executes it is incredibly subtle. She doesn't issue ultimatums that would cause a yellow to rebel instantly. They hate restriction. She has to make Lars choose isolation voluntarily. Lars has a best friend named Simon. They've been close for years. Anna slowly maneuvers Simon out of the picture by engineering crises that force Lars to cancel on him every single time. Lars and Simon have lunch planned for a Thursday. Thursday morning, Anna experiences an intense emotional breakdown. She claims Lars has been distant, that she fears he doesn't truly love her, or she manifests a sudden ambiguous physical illness, a migraine out of nowhere, a catastrophic crisis at work that leaves her hyperventilating. It is always something that forces Lars, who is deeply empathetic and wants to help, to call Simon and say, I'm so sorry, I have to cancel. Anna really needs me today. She does this with surgical precision. Every single time Lars tries to connect with his primary support system, a crisis erupts. Over the course of a year, Simon gets tired of being cancelled on. He stops reaching out. The friendship dissolves, and Anna's hands look completely clean. She can even say to Lars, oh, it's such a shame Simon stopped calling you. Playing the sympathetic partner, but the psychological dismantling goes deeper. She needs to crush his fundamental enthusiasm for social interaction altogether. The party scene Erikson describes captures this perfectly. They go to a party. Lars does what yellows do. He's chatting, telling jokes, being the center of attention. He spends 20 minutes talking to a woman named Mia. No romantic intent. He just enjoys the exchange of energy. On the drive home, Anna unleashes a torrent of manufactured jealousy. A massive scene, crying, shouting, accusing him of trying to humiliate her in public. She plays the devastated victim, claims she's terrified of losing him. Guilt trips him so profoundly that Lars, desperate to alleviate her pain, promises he will never speak to Mia again. And here's the part that reframes everything. Anna doesn't actually feel jealous in that moment. Jealousy stems from a fear of loss, from deep emotional attachment. The Dark Triad individual lacks that attachment entirely. The display of jealousy is theatrical. It is a control mechanism, a tool to condition Lars's behavior going forward. Eventually, Lars is so beaten down, so terrified of accidentally triggering a 3-day emotional crisis that he just stops going out altogether. The yellow's desperate need for connection is systematically starved until the only source of emotional input left is the manipulator. The case study ends with Lars sitting on the couch night after night, watching movies he hates, completely isolated, just to maintain a fragile peace. the complete erasure of a personality. Let's move to green. Erikson argues this is the most common behavioral profile in the general population. Greens are the embodiment of stability, passive, exceptionally friendly, deeply loyal, incredibly supportive, the glue of the group. They hold communities and families together because they consistently put the needs of others above their own. But their defining vulnerability is a profound, almost paralyzing fear of conflict and sudden change. So how does a manipulator exploit the desire for peace? By weaponizing that fear of conflict and coupling it with the green's natural susceptibility to guilt. Threaten the green with aggressive confrontation, and they will almost always fold to avoid the emotional turbulence. The case study here, Katie and Ed, is genuinely difficult to read because it is so common. Katie is a gentle divorced mother. She wants stability, a partner, a quiet life. She meets Ed at a neighborhood event. Ed is highly observant. He watches her body language, notes her shy demeanor, and realizes she requires a slow approach. He orchestrates accidental meetings at the local supermarket. He presents himself as highly efficient and decisive, which is incredibly attractive to a green, because greens often struggle with taking initiative. Having someone decisive enter their life feels like relief, like the decision-making weight has been lifted. They start dating. Ed accelerates the timeline just enough to bypass her defenses. Within weeks, he has essentially moved into her home. And because Katie's core drive is to be supportive and helpful, she inadvertently facilitates her own exploitation. Ed starts taking up space. He moves her furniture to suit his tastes, parks his car in her spot, lets her do his laundry and cook his meals. He makes her feel like she's providing immense value to his life, which satisfies her green need to be needed. And then the financial drain begins. A manipulator never asks for your life savings on day one. They test the perimeter first. Ed claims his new job messed up his direct deposit. Casually, could I borrow a few hundred just to cover expenses until Friday? Katie, loyal and trusting, transfers the money. Friday comes, and he doesn't pay it back. She says nothing, and the moment she says nothing, he knows the port is open. Soon he's buying expensive clothes on her credit card, spending his days watching premium movies on her couch while she's at work, financially bleeding her dry, incrementally, invisibly. Eventually, the reality of her depleting savings account forces Katie to do the one thing she hates most: initiate a confrontation. She musters the courage to ask about the money, about his job prospects. A normal person who has been freeloading might feel shame, might apologize, make excuses. But Ed, operating on the Dark Triad spectrum, goes entirely on the offensive. He escalates instantly to a level of aggression he knows Katie cannot handle. He doesn't answer the question about the money. He shouts. He flips the narrative, attacking her independence. How long are you going to let your mother govern your finances? You're a 40-year-old woman. Go to the bank, get a loan, and take control of your own life. And he couples this with a manipulative promise, a massive job interview coming next week. Everything is about to change. The moment he raises his voice, Katie's cognitive processing shuts down. Her only objective becomes returning the environment to peace. And Erikson makes a chilling observation here. Ed knows the explosion of anger is an investment. Once he demonstrates he is willing to scream at her, he rarely has to do it again. In the future, all it takes is a dark look, a raised eyebrow. The memory of that screaming match causes Katie to cave instantly. To avoid another confrontation, Katie goes to the bank, takes out a $7,000 personal loan, sinks herself into debt, and the moment she returns home with the funds, Ed demands half of it to invest in his non-existent business. He used her physiological terror of conflict to systematically bankrupt her, which brings us to the final color on the disc wheel, and perhaps the most difficult personality to manipulate: blue. Blues are defined by compliance and analytical rigor, meticulous, logical, detail-obsessed perfectionists. They don't operate on emotion, they operate on data, facts, and structure. The engineers, the actuaries, the people who read the instruction manual cover to cover before turning on the device, which sounds like a nightmare for a manipulator. The red exploit won't work. Blues don't have dominance-driven egos to target. The yellow exploit won't work. They don't care about charm or social mirroring. And the green exploit is useless. You cannot guilt trip a blue. If you try, they will simply ask you to provide the empirical data proving they committed an error. So how do you hack a spreadsheet? You don't attack their emotions. You attack their information ecosystem. You corrupt their data. And by extension, you destroy their credibility. The case study of George and Roger illustrates this perfectly. George is a highly respected specialist at his company. A brilliant blue. He knows the technical specifications of every project flawlessly, but he is a lone wolf. He doesn't network. He just does his work perfectly. Roger is hired as the new department head, a manipulator who immediately recognizes that George's intellectual independence is a threat to his control. Roger tries flattery first. It bounces off. George knows exactly what his skills are worth. Roger tries criticizing George's technical work. That fails spectacularly. George pulls out the documentation and empirically proves Roger is incorrect every single time. Direct confrontation on the battlefield of facts is a losing strategy, so Roger changes the battlefield entirely. He decides to destroy George's reputation and his grip on reality, quietly, from behind. It starts with subtle seeds of doubt. Roger pulls a colleague aside and asks, in a tone of feigned concern, "Have you noticed anything strange about George recently? He seems a bit distracted." The colleague says no. Roger just shakes his head, sighs, probably nothing, never mind, no formal accusation. But the seed of bias is planted. The next time George is quiet in a meeting, that colleague views it through Roger's lens. Then the warfare escalates to something more calculated. Roger leverages his administrative access and moves the weekly department meetings up by 50 minutes, but intentionally manipulates the calendar system so the update never reaches George's inbox. This is a direct attack on a blue's core identity, punctuality, structure, precision. George, the meticulous perfectionist, starts showing up to every single meeting 15 minutes late. He walks in confused while everyone else is already seated. And because Roger planted those seeds of doubt, the staff doesn't think there must be a calendar glitch. They think George is really losing his touch. When George confronts Roger about the discrepancy, Roger doesn't argue. He pulls up a forged email receipt showing the notification was allegedly sent, then looks at George with pity. The staff is really starting to lose confidence in your organizational skills, George. Can't you pull yourself together? And it culminates in a devastating one-on-one performance review. George, being a blue, spends his entire weekend preparing. He compiles a massive folder of data, project timelines, email logs, empirical proof of his competence. The meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. George arrives at 9:58. Roger is sitting at his desk, visibly furious. "Where have you been? This meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. You don't take anything seriously." George is stunned. He pulls out his phone, checks his calendar, and to his horror, the entry says 9 a.m. What George cannot fathom, what his blue mind literally cannot process as a possibility, is that Roger went into the shared system and changed the time after George had already saved it. Roger isn't just lying, he's attacking George's epistemic trust, his fundamental ability to rely on his own data. And when a blue cannot trust their data, their entire operating system crashes. Within 6 months of sustained sabotage, George is fired. He looks incompetent, disorganized, and completely broken. When you look at the totality of these 4 exploits, a truly terrifying realization emerges. The manipulator is not exploiting your flaws, they are weaponizing your greatest strengths. A red's ambition, a yellow's enthusiasm, a green's loyalty, a blue's precision. These are objectively beautiful human traits, but in the hands of a dark triad individual, they become the exact handles used to steer you off a cliff. The better you are at your natural traits, the more leverage they have over you, provided you remain unaware of the dynamic. So we have the map, we understand how the target gets profiled, but how does the engine actually run? Let's move beyond the personality profiles and into the underlying psychological mechanics. because this is where the buzzwords fall away and we get to the actual cognitive gears turning beneath the surface. When we talk about love bombing, we have to understand the neurological mechanism that makes it effective. The first core mechanic is arbitrary positive reinforcement, what behavioral psychology calls variable ratio reinforcement, and it traces back to B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning research, specifically the concept of unpredictable rewards. Now, here is how it works. You have a rat in a cage with a lever. In the first scenario, every time the rat presses the lever, a food pellet drops. The rat learns the association quickly. It presses when it's hungry, gets the food, and goes about its day. The behavior is stable. Then the scientists change the rules. They introduce a variable ratio schedule. The rat presses the lever. Nothing happens. Presses again. Nothing. Third time, 3 pellets drop. Presses again. Nothing. The reward becomes entirely unpredictable, decoupled from the effort. And the psychological result is profound. The rat doesn't stop pressing the lever, it becomes obsessed. The uncertainty triggers a massive spike in dopamine, not just the pleasure chemical, but the neurochemical responsible for seeking and motivation. The chase itself becomes the addiction. The rat will press the lever to the point of exhaustion, not because it's getting rewarded, but because it might. This is the exact mechanism that makes slot machines so destructive, and it maps devastatingly onto human relationships with manipulators. In the beginning, the love bombing phase, they give you the pellet every single time. Good morning text, constant validation, you are the most brilliant, most understood, most special person they have ever met. Your brain habituates to this massive, consistent influx of dopamine. You begin to base your emotional equilibrium on their approval, and then they switch the schedule. One day you send a text, and they leave you on read for 8 hours. When you see them, their body language is cold. The physical affection is withheld. You haven't changed anything, but the reward is gone. Because we are rationalizing creatures, we assume we must have done something wrong. We try to fix it. We press the lever harder. We become more accommodating, more affectionate, more apologetic, trying to crack the code and get the original version of this person back. We become addicted to the pursuit, trauma bonded to the slot machine. This deliberate restructuring of your reward circuitry transitions seamlessly into the second mechanic, triangulation. Triangulation is where the manipulator introduces an external third party into the dynamic to destabilize your sense of security. And this third party doesn't even need to be physically present. It could be an ex who suddenly texts, a brilliant new colleague at work who seems to possess all the skills you lack. If you're a disorganized yellow, they will constantly praise the meticulous precision of this blue colleague they keep mentioning. Here's the specific psychological redirection this achieves. Imagine you're at an auction for a painting. If you're the only bidder, you have time. You inspect the canvas, examine the brushstrokes, and rationally ask yourself, is this actually worth my money? But the moment a second bidder enters the room and raises their paddle, your psychology shifts entirely. You stop evaluating the painting. Your focus narrows to beating the other bidder. You get caught in an artificial bidding war, and you end up paying vastly more than the item is worth, just to secure the win. That's what triangulation does. It creates artificial scarcity. It shifts your internal monologue from, is this person treating me well? Is this relationship healthy? To, how do I secure my position? How do I prove I'm better than the alternative? The manipulator knows that if you are desperately expending energy to hold on to the relationship, you have no cognitive bandwidth left to question whether the relationship is worth holding on to in the first place. That total diversion of critical thinking leads directly to the third mechanic, smokescreens. Psychologists sometimes call this DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's the mechanism used to evade accountability the moment toxic behavior gets caught. The classic example, you find undeniable proof on their phone that they've been texting an ex inappropriately. You confront them. A person with a normal emotional baseline would feel guilt, offer an apology, substance of what you found. The Dark Triad individual executes a smokescreen. They completely ignore the substance of your accusation, the inappropriate texting, and instantly pivot to attacking the methodology of your discovery. Feigned outrage, I cannot believe you violated my privacy. You went through my phone. How can I be in a relationship with someone so deeply insecure and controlling that they spy on me? The entire architecture of the argument flips. You are no longer prosecuting their behavior. You are desperately defending yourself against charges of being a controlling partner. And if they know your disc profile, they weaponize it. If you're a red, they say, you are always so aggressive and domineering, you're suffocating me. Your own natural traits become the instrument used to invalidate your entirely justified confrontation. The original transgression gets buried under the smokescreen of your alleged behavioral flaws. And this constant shifting of reality leads to the fourth mechanic, and perhaps the most damaging one, gaslighting. This word has been so diluted in pop culture that it now means almost anything, anytime someone lies, anytime someone disagrees with you. But true gaslighting is far more severe than that. If someone eats the last piece of cake and denies it, that's just a lie. Gaslighting is a sustained, systematic campaign designed to erode your epistemic trust, your fundamental belief in your own memory, your own perception, your own sanity. It's about dismantling the foundational reality in which you operate. Erikson provides an example that illustrates exactly how this works. Your partner tells you they're going out for the evening with their friend Anna. Midnight comes, they're not home. You call Anna's house, her husband answers and tells you Anna has been asleep for hours. She hasn't been out all night. Your partner returns home at 2 a.m. You confront them. You lied to me. You weren't with Anna. The gaslighter doesn't apologize, doesn't even bother with a smokescreen. They look you dead in the eye with absolute, unflinching conviction and say, I never said Anna. I said I was going out with Hannah. Who even is Anna? We don't hang out with Anna anymore. Are you feeling okay? You've been forgetting so many things lately. I'm actually getting really worried about your memory. The conviction is what makes it so destabilizing. When someone lies to you with zero physiological signs of deceit, no hesitation, no nervous tells, your brain struggles to process the conflict. If they do this consistently, compounding small reality distortions over months, you actually begin to think, wait, did they say Hannah? Am I losing my mind? You become entirely dependent on the manipulator to interpret reality for you. And once a manipulator controls your perception of reality, they have achieved total control. You are operating inside their constructed world. Most explorations of this topic would stop here. They'd hand you a list of red flags and wish you luck. But Erikson's framework and the critical analysis surrounding it forces us to cross a much more uncomfortable threshold. Because the ultimate question isn't just, how do you spot a psychopath? The deeper, far more challenging question is, how did you become someone who didn't notice sooner? And we have to tread carefully here. This is not victim blaming. This is not about asserting that anyone deserves to be manipulated. It is about the empowering realization that external vigilance alone is insufficient. True protection requires internal illumination. You have to understand your own blind spots. To articulate this, Erikson draws on a classic psychological model, the Johari Window, 4 panes, pan 1, the open area, traits and behaviors known to you and visible to everyone else. Pane 2, the hidden area, things you know about your internal state but actively conceal. Pane 4, the unknown, latent potential, subconscious drivers that neither you nor anyone else has recognized yet. But pane 3 is where the danger lives. Pane 3 is the blind spot, the behaviors, the micro-expressions, the radiating needs that everyone else can clearly see, but that you are entirely oblivious to. The Dark Triad manipulator does not operate in your open area. They set up residence squarely in your blind spot. Apply this to the disc profiles. If you are a green, in your open area, you believe you are simply a kind and supportive person. But in your blind spot, what you are actually radiating is a desperate need to derive your self-worth by being indispensable to damaged people. You can't see the neediness. But the manipulator reads it on day one. They move into the gap between your idealized self-image and your actual behavioral output. The ultimate defense, then, is shrinking the blind spot, But how do you actually do that when you're already in the trenches? When someone is actively using these mechanics against you right now, how do you defend the perimeter? Erikson provides a specific, escalating manual for resistance. Let's walk through it. Defense 1. Break the momentum. Manipulators rely entirely on your conditioned, immediate emotional reflex. They raise their voice. Your reflex is to cower. They accuse you of being controlling. Your reflex is to desperately defend your character. You have to break that neural circuit. Introduce a massive, unexpected pause into the interaction. Deprive them of your immediate emotional reaction. Use purely logistical excuses to buy yourself processing time. If they corner you on the phone and launch into a dizzying triangulation tactic, you don't engage with the content. You say, my battery is at 1%. I have to find a charger. I'll call you back. Click. If they corner you in the office, you look at your watch. Stand up. I have a hard stop right now. We'll pause this here. You physically remove yourself from the pressure cooker. You reclaim your physiological baseline. And from that baseline, you deploy the second defense. Defense 2. Become a broken record. Manipulators are masters of rhetorical judo. And the mistake most people make is offering an explanation when they set a boundary. But the moment you explain, you hand the manipulator ammunition. If Ed asks Katie for another loan and Katie says, I can't lend you money because I need to pay my property taxes, she's just entered a debate. Ed instantly responds, I'll pay you back 3 days before the taxes are due. Don't you trust me? She gave him a solvable problem. Now she's trapped. Instead, the broken record. I'm not comfortable lending you money. I need time to think about our finances. When they attack, what is there to think about? You're being horribly selfish. I thought we were a team. You do not defend against the accusation of being selfish. You repeat the exact same phrase, same words, same neutral tone. I understand you're frustrated, but I need time to think about our finances. Zero new information, zero new angles to attack. You starve them of conversational oxygen until they exhaust their own tactics. Defense 3. Deprogram the guilt. When you hold that boundary, the manipulator will escalate. They will rage. They will sulk. They will play the martyr. And here is the hard psychological truth you have to accept. You cannot control their emotional state. If they choose to throw a tantrum because you refuse to be exploited, that tantrum belongs entirely to them. It is not your responsibility to manage their disappointment. You have to cultivate the ability to sit calmly in the presence of their manufactured unhappiness. And when the time comes for direct confrontation, Erikson provides a remarkably precise 4-step formula designed specifically to neutralize smokescreens, structured like a mathematical equation. Step 1. When you do, insert the specific, observable action. Step 2. I feel. Insert the specific emotion. Step 3. If you stop doing that and instead did, insert the desired behavior. Step 4. Then I would feel. Insert the desired outcome. Apply it to the George and Roger scenario. You don't say, you are a toxic manager trying to ruin my career. That invites a smokescreen immediately. Instead, when you change meeting times without ensuring I received a notification, I feel undermined and disrespected. If you stopped altering the calendar at the last minute and instead communicated schedule changes directly, then I would feel respected and able to contribute effectively. You are not mind reading. You are not accusing anyone of malice. You are stating an undeniable cause and effect relationship regarding your own internal state based entirely on observable data. There is no smokescreen available. There is nothing to attack. And this brings us to the final and most revealing diagnostic test. You've paused the momentum. You've held the broken record. You've deployed the 4-step formula. You've drawn a clear, unassailable boundary. What happens next determines everything. If the person you're dealing with is simply a human being who picked up some toxic communication habits along the way, they will be genuinely shocked by the confrontation. They will feel remorse. They will apologize, and they will make a real effort to change. But if they are operating high on the Dark Triad spectrum, they will not change. Not because they won't, but because they structurally cannot. The traits are wired in. They might fake compliance for a week, just long enough to lower your guard. But the manipulation will return, and it will likely be more covert, more punishing than before, because now you've proven yourself a difficult target who requires more sophisticated tactics to control. If that happens, the research is unequivocal. There is no therapy you can provide for them. There is no perfect sequence of words that will unlock their empathy. There is no version of this where you love them into becoming someone different. The only viable defense strategy is removal. You leave the relationship, you transfer departments, you cut contact. You stop trying to teach the shark to be a vegetarian, and you simply get out of the water. So let's bring this full circle. We started by examining the evolutionary game theory of the Dark Triad, understanding why nature allows these short-term exploitative strategies to persist at all. We used the disc model to map our own vulnerabilities. We pulled back the curtain on variable reinforcement, triangulation, smoke screens, and gaslighting. And finally, we confronted the Johari Window, the uncomfortable truth that shrinking our own blind spots is the only armor that actually holds. It's a profound journey, from being the unwitting subject of someone else's behavioral experiment to becoming the sovereign architect of your own reality. And I want to leave you with one final thought. We've spent this entire episode talking about defense, armor, blind spots, recognizing predators, but if our greatest vulnerabilities to manipulation are actually just our most beautiful human traits, our empathy, our optimism, our instinct to trust, pushed to their natural extremes, how do we remain open in this world without constantly living behind a reinforced wall? Is it possible that the inescapable price of experiencing true, profound human connection is simply accepting the inherent risk of being seen by the wrong person? That tension between open vulnerability and necessary armor, it is the defining tightrope walk of the human experience. Thomas Erikson doesn't fully resolve it. No book does. But what he gives you, what this framework gives you, is the vocabulary to at least walk that tightrope with your eyes open. That's worth something. That's worth a lot. Thank you for spending this time here today. Keep questioning the dynamics around you, protect your open ports, and I'll catch you on the next one.